described as a fixture at the Omega Communications Conference on the UFO experience. It's Bud Hopkins. This marks his third appearance in 5 years. But he's here for very important reasons, to share his important new research with us in a very, very important aspect of the UFO experience. Bud Hopkins is a painter, a sculptor, and of course a ufologist, working in the area of abductee cases. He's been investigating UFOs since 1964, when he observed a small circular metallic craft over Cape Cod. In 1981, he published his book Missing Time, in which he documented 7 cases of people who said they had been abducted by aliens. And this line of research led to his highly acclaimed book Intruders, which focuses on what he describes as, quote, the most complex and admittedly inconceivable alien abduction case history to date. That was the case of Kathy Davis, real name Deborah Tomey, who spoke here several years ago. Bud was graduated from Oberlin College. As a painter and a sculptor, his works have been shown in many museums and galleries in the United States and Europe. He's received many awards, among them a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship and a John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship. His work is in the permanent collections of numerous institutions, including the Guggenheim, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the British Museum. As a UFO investigator, he's spoken on just about every radio and television talk show there is. Intruders is being produced as a film by 20th Century Fox Studios. Bud lives in New York City with his wife, April, his daughter, and, as I said once before, Bootsy, the most gorgeous cat I've ever seen. Please welcome Bud Hopkins.
It is a familiar room, and thanks very much, John. I'm going to do several different things today. I always have a horror of repeating myself for people who have been at another conference where I've been speaking, and that they may be terrified that they're going to hear some of the same cases. Well, they will hear some of the same cases, but there's new material, actually some very fresh material as of about 3 hours ago. Hypnotic regression session I did, which deals with a case, a very interesting case that occurred about 40 miles away from where we're sitting right now. I'm essentially going to focus, after a couple new cases, on the situation of children who have been abducted. This is one of the most touching and disturbing aspects of the abduction phenomenon, and it's one that is in a certain sense very, very raw and available to the investigator. It is also a situation where all the therapeutic skills that anybody has learned along their life can be useful, because children are often extremely traumatized, and the parents are feeling in most cases extremely helpless to handle these situations. And I've developed a projective test, which I will show you, which has been very, very effective in helping uncover the basic traumas and experiences of these little children. We use this with kids from the ages of even 2.5 up to about 8 or 9. It's extremely interesting. First of all, before we get into those cases involving children, I'd like to get into a couple of recent things that I've received, one of which, as I mentioned, happened near here, and I'll go into it in a few moments. But first of all, a case that occurred in France. I've just heard about this case, and I'll read the letter as quickly as I can. It's extremely interesting. This is a letter written to me by an American woman who is now living in England about an experience which, some experiences which happened to her and to a French exchange student, young exchange student, who was visiting her when they lived in Florida in 1988, who she calls Claude. She describes him as coming from, not his real name, coming from a very, very well-known French family. And I've looked into the family from who's who, and everything is as she describes it. Quite wealthy family, but very well known in France. She described that when he had first come to Florida to visit them in 1988, one night he related a very bizarre story to me. He started telling me that he was very frightened because he knew that they would, quotes, would soon catch up with him again. When I asked him who they were, me thinking that he may be in trouble with the law or something of that nature, he explained that they were these creatures that had been plaguing him since he was a young child living in France. At that point, I still did not quite comprehend what he was trying to tell me, and I was a bit worried that he might be going through some emotional trauma since the breakup of his family. She listened to his whole story. Ever since he was young, he's been visited by creatures that were about 4.5 to 5 feet tall. They were kind of gray and delicate looking, having very large heads, but he said it was their eyes that really startled him. He said they were large and very black and like liquid. Now, I want to just point out, from having been in England recently, speaking, and having been in Paris too recently, the basic hope, I think, of people who were researching UFO phenomena in France is that there's no such thing as French abduction cases. They also hope that in England that there are no such thing as English abduction cases. And I think some of you may know, because the power of denial is so powerful in so many people, that one of the great theories that has been presented in England to explain away abduction cases is that it's an American phenomenon. That doesn't happen in England, and it's basically an American psychological, political problem, because Americans are inventing an abduction phenomenon of little gray aliens, as have just been described, to replace their basic terror, which is of a fear of more immigration by Hispanics. Now, I said I have a number of Hispanic American abductees, and I'm sure that's their feeling. At any rate, the basic point about why I think this letter is extremely significant. The woman had read my book, Missing Time. The young man had apparently read nothing, but this is what he describes. He said it started when he was living in one of his father's country homes in the countryside of France. He was lying in bed one night, and these creatures came through his wall as if it were not there. 1988, that wasn't something people read in books very frequently. He said he could not scream, and he was paralyzed. They took him outside, but he cannot remember how he came to be outside. Then all of a sudden he was in a strange place. Again, he cannot recollect how he came to be there, only that one minute he was outside, the next he's in a small room lying on some kind of table. He said that they started examining him, and he was very frightened and angry. Without telling me too much, he also said that they were very interested in his sexual organs. In the course of time, Claude told me that they seemed particularly interested in his reproductive organs, and he felt as if he were being raped. He said that he had many encounters with these creatures throughout his life, and no matter where he went, they always found him. After we talked, I tried to reassure him that he was very safe with us. He said that I did not understand, that there was nothing I could do to stop them. But he felt better because I did listen and didn't make fun of him. I was still a little worried about him, but I just didn't know what to make of what he told me. I decided to just not think about it, and maybe he wouldn't. Now we get into a Thanksgiving times. Her mother came to visit. We lived only 15 minutes from Sanford, where there was a drive-in theater, so we knew we would be home before 12:30. Had gone to this theater with the boy. We were driving home, the small, dark, one-lane highway, which in spots is very isolated, and the next thing I remember is that we seemed to be further down the road than I thought we should be. I then began yelling at my husband because my ear was hurting terribly, and I thought that maybe because he left the windows in the car open that a mosquito got into my ear and bit me. But then why didn't I feel it bite me? I think now the reason I was yelling was that I was tense for another reason, but did not know why. Just as we were turning the last corner before we arrived home, I just suggested we should drive down to the local Dairy Queen to get a treat. My husband looked at his watch and said the Dairy Queen was closed now. I told him I thought they stayed open until 1 a.m. on weekends, and he said it's 3 a.m. For some reason, no one in the car said a thing about the time. We just went inside the house when we arrived home, and we all went to bed. I had real difficulty trying to sleep because my ear was really hurting. I was nearly in tears, but somehow, after a while, I managed to get a few hours of badly needed sleep. In the morning, my ear and the whole side of my face were so swollen that I could not even close my mouth. I was in such pain I decided to go to the doctor's. She wanted to see if I had been bitten in the ear. I honestly do not know why I kept thinking I had been bitten by something, because I do not remember the feeling of actually being bitten. That's very interesting when you think of being bitten down in the ear by something. That was her conscious recollection. I think we might make some guesses as to what the actual cause of that was. The doctor examined me and said that he had rarely, if ever, seen an ear as swollen as mine. Again, my face was so swollen I couldn't eat, and because I could not close my mouth properly. He treated it as an ear infection. He gave her antibiotics and so forth. Several days before it went down. After my first visit to the doctor, when I arrived home, I decided to ask my mother if she felt something strange happened on the way home from the theater. She asked me what I meant. I explained to her that I couldn't understand why it took us so long to get home from the theater. 15-minute drive seemed to become a 3-hour drive. And I asked her if I was going crazy or just imagining it or what. My mother, someone has both feet planted firmly on the ground. I trust what she has to say, and that is why I thought that if I were imagining things, she would put me straight. To my surprise, she said that yes, somehow we seemed to have lost 3 hours, because she knew we left the drive-in a little after midnight, and then that was the last movie, and the next thing she knew, it was 3 in the morning. I asked my husband what he thought about what happened. He too found it hard to digest, but agreed he couldn't understand why we got home so late. Anyway, they're all aware that this is going on, and it's getting very upset. Claude too realized that we'd somehow lost 3 hours, but he seemed resigned to it. He just said it was happening all over again. Sometimes he remembered seeing him, and sometimes he just lost time that he could not explain. I now started to take what he was saying very seriously. One night, when my husband was awake, Claude and I were up late playing one of my son's video games. It was about 1 in the morning, and I told him we would need to get some sleep. 1 minute he was playing the video game, and the next thing I know is that he was now sitting on the floor facing me. The television and the game were off, and it was about 2:30 in the morning. We didn't say much to each other, and I said we really needed to go to bed now. Claude went to his room, and I went to mine. As usual, I checked in on Tim, her son, just before going to bed, and for some reason felt the need to wake him up and move him into my bed. I was terrified that someone was going to hurt him. I woke him up and told him to come sleep in my bed for the night. He did, but he wasn't too happy about doing so. About 10 minutes after I turned the lights off in my room, Claude knocked on the door and asked if he could sleep on the floor in my bedroom in his sleeping bag. He said he was too scared to sleep alone. He didn't have to say why. I knew. I told him okay. And for the rest of the night, I don't think either of us got much sleep. A few days before Christmas, my mother came down yet again to spend the holidays with us. We now had in my house my mother, husband, son, our friend Ron, and myself. One night, we were all sleeping. I awoke with a thud. I started screaming to my husband that someone dropped me on the bed. He looked at me and thought he heard me wrong and asked to repeat myself. I told him in a very panicked voice I had been dropped on the bed. I felt it. He said, "Go back to bed, you're having a nightmare." I told him once again I was dropped. I was not dreaming. I rolled over and went to sleep, seeing that it was doing me no good trying to convince my very tired husband. I was again awakened early in the morning, but this time by a very upset husband's voice. He came running to the room shouting that I had to get up right away and see Claude. Instantly, may we have the lights out, and I'll have the first slide, please. It was about 7 in the morning. I don't know, is this going on by itself here? It was about 7 in the morning, and Steve was getting up to go to the bathroom when, to his amazement, he found the bathroom door open and Claude lying on the floor in the bathroom, naked and unconscious. He got Ron up, and together they moved Claude into the den. He regained consciousness not long after they took him. He could not remember anything except that he went to bed, and now he was on the couch in the den with Steve and Ron trying to wake him up. Something strange had happened to him. What it was, I do not know. But what I do know is that when my husband found him face down, he had large scratch marks on his back that seemed to be in a semicircular pattern. He also had a very deep cut on the pad of his large toe. It was a strange cut. It was cut on the pad of his toe from the foot outward. It's very hard to explain what I mean by that, but as you may have already noticed in the photographs, as soon as I saw him, I told him we really should take photographs of his condition. He was a bit nervous about doing so, but he finally agreed. The one thing that was really amazing to me was that Claude had these scratches on his back and this deep cut on his toe, and he said he did not feel a thing. He was numb. He refused to go to the doctors. He did not want to be asked questions, and he said that he really did not hurt at all. His toe was cut deep, but it was not gaping. It seemed that even though it was deep, it would require stitches. It's very hard to explain his injuries. I only hope the photographs will help you understand better. After we all calmed down a bit, the realization of what happened really started to hit home. Something did happen. I was dropped on the bed. Claude was unconscious on the bathroom floor, naked and injured. What happened, I do not know. But something did happen that I'm sure of. It was Mr. Hopkins, I really can't tell you I saw aliens. What I can tell you is that something strange happened to me. And she goes on into describing a few more missing time episodes where this kind of thing has happened to her. I come from a family of skeptics. My father used to be the head of liquor and narcotics control for a state government. He was in law enforcement all of his life and didn't take stock in anything he could not see or touch. She described something more about the family and their freedom from this kind of bizarre happening. She says, as for Claude, I hear from him from time to time. He sends postcards to me from all over the world. He's a photographer now, and he likes to keep on the move. He once told me that if he moved around, he felt it would be harder for them to find him. Well, Claude is moving around all over the world. I know you're probably inundated with letters, etc. Now, what's interesting and significant is, without any connection with any books, this young man has not read anything according to the implication of her letter. He's talking about the same old sexual experimentations, the same old cuts and bruises and so forth that we do find in these cases. So what we're finding is, again, patterns around the world. One only goes by patterns. Any one particular case floating out there somewhere with very unusual features that we've never heard of before has to remain on a back shelf until we get more cases. I'll show you a few more slides having to do with some recent cases. This is a young woman in Washington who was abducted actually this past Saturday night and the Thursday before that. But these happen to be marks that turned up on her body from an incident a little over a year ago. These were actually, it would seem, handprints, fingerprints, and under hypnosis where the bruising fingers held her. Under hypnosis, we know a great deal about that incident. Now, before we get into children's cases, I want to go into another case which I think will be of interest to Linda Howe in particular. This is the one that occurred right near here. A woman wrote to me, and I have since seen her, and as I mentioned, we've done a hypnotic regression session, just the beginning of the investigation. She has 3 children. She is a very responsible, stable person, a very, very nice person. And she wrote me recently about an incident that occurred about 1980. She lived in a very isolated area, and she and her husband were going to bed, and she noticed that behind the barn, very large barn behind her house, was a very bright pink glow. Her husband felt it might be children playing with railroad flares. The mind invents wonderful stuff. And said, don't worry, we'll just go to bed. There was no sound. The children were not yelling and playing and so forth. And the light seemed very peculiar. He said, no, the cat must be in the room somewhere. Although I called the cat and searched the house, I couldn't find him anywhere. The dream I had was that I had been chosen to see something. I don't know what, but I was given a tour by some people. I don't remember what they looked like. All I remember was that I was special and chosen. And it was amusing and sad and touching. But the complexity of it, I think, is well stated. She told me later on the telephone, but I felt privileged and chosen and raped. They showed me this room, the people in the dream, and where they had animals hung up on hooks or something. All I can truly remember seeing for animals was something that looked like a giraffe. They were in a large room, and there was some sort of table in the middle. They were doing experiments, grafting different body parts from animals, like taking a leg off one kind of animal and replacing it with a leg from a different animal. I saw that my cat was on the table, and they were cutting him up. I freaked out and told them they were demons. I saw them as evil. I felt at that time they were doing something to me, like drugging me or something, and that was all I could remember that morning. But it was dreamlike. I remember that I really wanted to leave, but was unable to move, and was being forced to calm down or go to sleep or something. Anyway, her husband went off to work, the children got up. She did her washing and went outside. A friend of mine came over. I told her about the dream, and I hadn't seen the cat since. We went outside, and I told her I wanted to look behind the barn for the cat. It's an interesting kind of connection. The light had been behind the barn. The cat is missing, and she decides that's where she wants to. Her association is with the back of the barn, the cat. Then we saw the cat come walking up from the field in front of the barn. His face and neck were sliced, like about half of the left face and nose and part of his neck was gone. I remember seeing his back teeth exposed and dried or coagulated blood around the edges. It didn't look ripped, it looked sliced. Neither of us could see how it was possible that he was still alive. I told her I was going to get a box inside the house and put him in and take him to the vets. Now, she told me today she was only about that far from the cat. She turned 6 feet away to the part of the house, the shed, where the boxes were. She reached in and grabbed the box, and when I turned around, the cat was gone. I asked my friend where he went, and she looked back where he had been. She'd been looking at her getting the box, and she didn't know he was gone. We looked around and called him. We never saw the cat again. Now, she went on to describe another thing in the morning, was moving around in a kind of a trance-like state. And she said she felt very groggy all that day. And she also said that when she looked at her nightgown, there were little burrs and things of that sort, little prickers, as she called them, stuck to the bottom of her nightgown. She had not remembered going outside. Well, under hypnosis, we got to a point where it would certainly seem she was about to go outside, and she got rather frightened and wanted to be brought out of the trance temporarily, which we did. Her fear was so great that there was an enormous amount of trembling, and when she had gone a few days ago to take some photographs of the old barn, she told me that she was unable to get very near to the barn or go around behind it because it was just too absolutely terrifying. Well, these are just two typical new cases. The one is special because it happened near here, and it did involve an animal mutilation possibility here, which we do run into from time to time, and Linda, I think once or twice in her life, has run into such an incident. The other one is important because of it being such a classic case from France. So we do have this kind of pattern. Now, we'll go into the children's cases, which is the main point here. This particular case is a typical one. This little boy lives in Manhattan. There are 2 apartment buildings separated by a small court. This is a drawing that he did the morning after the incident. Now, this particular recollection, when he woke up, and he was, I believe, 6 years old at the time, perhaps 7, he had awakened in the morning. He was terrified. He was crying. He was extremely upset. And he told his mother that these people with big eyes had come in the house. They had taken him away. And at one point, in the middle of crying and falling apart, he said, he stopped crying and stared at his mother, and he said, "Mommy, why don't you love me anymore?" And she said, "But I do love you. How can you say that?" And he said, "No, you don't, because when I was crying for you, you were just standing there, and you weren't moving, and you weren't even looking at me." The switched off situation. And she, of course, assured him that if she had been able to move, she certainly would have, and so on. I have talked to an awful lot of families and an awful lot of adults who have hidden resentments towards their parents, which, when we explore the situation under hypnosis, turns out to be a case where the child was unable to get help from the parents, and the child forever after secretly harbored the feeling of not being loved and having been abandoned by parents. I would believe, psychologically, if we look into this, that a large number of quote-unquote dysfunctional families in this country may have, a large number of them, may have at their heart, as a cause, the fact of this sort of UFO incident. Now, as I've said hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, I do not regard the UFO occupants as being malevolent, evil stormtroopers doing their awful stuff out of some desire to hurt. They are simply doing what they are doing without any kind of understanding, I truly believe, of our emotions, of our needs, or what they're actually doing in terms of wrecking the texture of life of many, many families, and of course, huge numbers of individuals. I dealt with a woman once who was having trouble in her marriage. She was having trouble with her very young children, and she told me that she was having, all her life, she had had a lot of anger towards her mother. Well, under hypnosis, although she did not know why, she'd done some therapy, nobody could get at what it was about. Well, under hypnosis, she had, I'll back up a moment, she had remembered consciously something coming over the house when she was a very small child. She remembered running and being very frightened and seeing a group of little men with big heads chasing her, being absolutely terrified. And she'd climbed up one of those clothes-drying racks that people have sometimes in their backyard. It's a pole with a series, like an upside-down umbrella on the top, with clothesline. She was able to pull herself up on this as one of her things she did as a little girl. very tiny kid, but she could pull herself up. She climbed up there and was screaming for help, and these little guys were after her. That's the end of the conscious memory. Under hypnosis, she is up on top of this thing in absolute dread panic, and she's screaming for her mother, and about 20 feet away is the back of the house, and there is a big picture window over the sink, and she can see through the window as she's screaming. Her mother's standing there absolutely frozen, holding a dish rag and a plate, just absolutely unmoving, that she was in the process of drying. Now, this little girl harbored from then on the feeling of not being loved and not being protected. I have had this two ways. I've had it from adults. I've had a case where a man pleaded, and he told me this with enormous embarrassment, pleaded with the aliens to leave him alone and take the child. Can you imagine a man even having the strength of character to confess that to somebody? I mean, that's a hard thing for any human being to have to admit. At any rate, these stories are replete with that kind of situation. Now, I don't think the aliens are coming down here saying, well, we're going to really wreck American families. We're going to be destructive. They're just doing their thing according to their particular clipboard with their agenda. They do what they have to do. And they try to make it easy for people, and they try to reduce the pain and the shock. But the fallout is extraordinary. I feel sometimes when people will say, well, they're here for our good, and we're actually the reason they're here to help us, that this is strong medicine. And if it is true, and it is strong medicine, I'm in a position of saying I find the side effects intolerable. Now, to go back to this particular case, this little boy had described floating out the window, going straight up to the sky where there was this craft. And he was there, he draws himself saying, oh God, he was so scared. Now, it's very interesting. His mother had the perspicacity and insight and so on to say to him, sit down and make a drawing, Johnny, of what you saw. And that is extremely helpful for anybody who's going through this with your own children. It's extremely helpful for the child to gain some kind of mastery, some sense of getting some control back over his or her life. So he started working on this very carefully. He pointed out over there that that's the moon, and those little dots around are stars, and he apologized that he had not been able to get all the stars in the picture. And I know what that's like, being an artist myself. But incidentally, I don't know whether any of you have ever seen one of the greatest Larson Far Side cartoons, but it shows a little boy and a little girl up on the top of a hill looking up into the night sky at all this wonderful panoply of stars, and the little boy is saying, you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of stars up there. And the caption is, Carl Sagan is a child. At any rate, he went straight out the window and straight up into this craft. This is his drawing, part 2. On the left is one of the men who was in the craft. And on the right, in the middle there, I should say, is himself, with his little shirt. Now, his mother asked him what those curving lines were all around his head. They may be hard for you to see in the audience. He has all these little curving lines, his funny eyes. And he said, that's me, Mommy, shaking and shivering because I'm so scared. Now, it's extremely important to realize that he has drawn his own hands the way children will often do. My daughter did that too when she was a little child. My mother claims I did it until I was 19, and then I learned how to draw. But the hand is like a little flower. It's a series of little loops, and that's the way he draws human hands. But when he got to the aliens, he decided to do a different hand, and he actually drew over them, the one sitting at the console on the right, who incidentally, he said, never turned around and looked at me, which is very typical of alien behavior. I mean, I always thought that's very different than our, if our astronauts ever got some alien specimen and had it up standing there, you know, in a spaceship, I'm sure every American astronaut would be crowding around for a look. But the aliens, the ones who sit at the consoles, just sit at the consoles. They have no curiosity. They don't have, apparently, that kind of range of human emotion. But anyway, the little guy is sitting there. He had drawn the flower hand, and then he went over it with these sharper things, which he put on the alien on the left. The dots were to make the face gray, and he said they didn't have noses that he could see, which is quite interesting. A child tries to get things right. This is a little boy who wants to be very literal. Now, I'll read you something he said from an interview I did with him, which I think is very, very nice. He said, I was really scared. Something was pulling me, and I went out the window. The creatures didn't talk to me, and I was afraid they were going to keep me in, whatever you call it, the flying machine, and I'd never see Mom or Dad or Stephen again, his brother. I was scared of them because I didn't know who they were or what they were. I was scared because what if they kidnapped me and never brought me home? What if they turned me into one of them? He said in cartoons they're green with aliens, with antennas and stuff, but they weren't like that. They were weird looking. They had faces, gray-like, and black eyes, big black eyes, and their eyes sort of looked like upside-down tear shapes. I don't know if they had a nose. I just saw two little lines there and a mouth. No ears, but I think they could hear me. They don't have strong bodies. The way they look in the face, they look sad. Maybe they're always sad. I haven't told anybody at school. I'd be too embarrassed and scared to tell my teachers. They'd call me a liar. I only tell my mom. I really think the creatures are doing harm. People don't deserve to be scared when they sneak up and take you. Just thinking about it is scary. Now, when this little boy was just back from the hospital after his birth, he was put in a room with his older brother, who was 7 years old at the time. And the mother said that she woke up one night when actually she was awake at the time. She has a lot of trouble sleeping at night. She's had enough abduction experiences of her own, and sleep disorders are very, very common in these situations. She said that her little son came in and said, Mommy, there are three little doctors looking at Johnny. And she went into the room. He said they have lights and they're shining a light on it. So she went in and, of course, very frightened. She said she peeked around the door very slowly and nothing was there. Anyway, this is Steve's drawing that he did at the age of about 14 or so of the three little doctors standing next to the crib. And as you can see, they're pretty small, looking at at little Johnny. This is a family that had multiple experiences. This is a drawing by a little boy who, again, got the sense of the huge eyes and the mouth and not much else, part of the alien. There's a long, complicated story that goes with this, and I will make it short and complicated. This little boy lives in North Carolina with his sister, and at the time she was perhaps, I guess, 5 and he was 7. They began telling their mother separately that the night people, as they called it, were coming in and taking them out, and they went right through the wall. One of the children said, "You go right through the wall and you don't get dirty." And then they went up this blue light beam into this place in the sky, and she said, "You see the weird children up there. They have weird children." And she described the weird children as not looking like them, the night people, and not looking like us. She said they have big heads, but they have hair, but it's all white and there isn't much of it. And she said, and they don't smile, and we have to play games. They want us to play games with the children, with the weird children. But I don't like to play games because they don't understand my games and I don't understand their games. What's fascinating, and I'll get back to this in a minute, is an attempt to kind of get an interaction between, it's a very touching thing in a way, between what I believe to be hybrid children and normal humans. And incidentally, again, I always want to make the point, when I use the word alien, I'm not using it in any pejorative sense. I use it in the most accurate sense possible. It's to say what something isn't. And I say again and again, when I'm in Mexico City, I'm an alien. It says nothing about where I'm from. When I say these people are alien, they're not from North Haven or Nebraska or wherever. But anyway, the little girl in this case, his sister, said at one point that she was taken outside. She told her mother, the night people